Good evening. This is the meeting of the Athens Board of Zoning Appeals. The time is 7:06 p.m. and the date is Tuesday, December 10th, 2024. At this time, I'll call the meeting to order. The board currently consists of 5 members and 1 alternate. The alternates taking full part in discussions and becoming a voting member in the absence of a member or when a member abstains for conflict of interest. Members present tonight are Ben Lockman, Alicia Sweeney, just sworn in tonight, full member, and alternate Shay Myers. So alternates will take part in the full discussion and voting when there is not a full slate. And tonight we don't have a full slate. We have 4 people, and so Shay will be voting. I'm Rob Delich, Chair of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Also present and representing the city are Zoning Administrator Mr. David Riggs and Leah, zoning intern. So there's one case on tonight's agenda for a property located at 141 Mill Street. The board is required to take testimony under oath. Would anyone wishing to speak tonight concerning any item on the agenda, please stand. Do you swear or affirm that any testimony you will present to the board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Seated. I now invite you to view a pre-recorded video of the rules of the board.
The Athens Board of Zoning Appeals operates according under the following procedure. The chair will name and describe the case. The zoning administrator or secretary will state the basis of the objection and any applicable facts or conditions pertaining to the case. The appellant or their representative will give reason why the appeal should be viewed favorably. Anyone wishing to speak in favor of the request will be heard. Anyone wishing to speak in general comment will be heard. Anyone wishing to speak in opposition will be heard. If necessary, the appellant or their representative will offer concluding summary or rebuttal remarks. Testimony from the floor shall be closed. The board will deliberate and render a decision. According to Athens City Code Section 23.7.3b, the board has power to grant variances from the strict application of the code, provided the variance will not be contrary to the public interest. The spirit of the code is observed, public safety and welfare are secured, and substantial justice is done. According to Athens City Code Section 23.7.10c, variances from the code shall not be granted unless the board makes specific findings of fact, based directly on the particular evidence presented to it, that the standards and conditions imposed in this title, if applicable, have been met by the applicant. Exceptional circumstances. There are exceptional or extraordinary circumstances or conditions applying to the property in question or to the intended use of the property that do not apply generally to other properties or classes or uses in the same zone. Practical difficulty and undue hardship. Because of exceptional or extraordinary conditions pertaining to a specific piece of property. A literal enforcement of these regulations will result in practical difficulty or undue hardship that is unnecessary to the achievement of public purposes. Preservation of equal property rights. Literal interpretation of these regulations would deprive the appellant of rights commonly enjoyed by others in the same zone and the same vicinity, while a granting of the requested variance will not confer on the applicant any special privilege that is denied to other properties in the same zone and the same vicinity. Minimum variance. The variance granted is the minimum variance required to make possible the reasonable use of the property. Absence of detriment. The authorizing of such variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property and will not materially impair the purpose of the zoning code or the public interest. Not of a general nature. The condition or situation of the specific piece of property or the intended use of said property for which variance is sought, one or the other or in combination, is not of so general or recurrent a nature as to make reasonably practicable the formulation of a general regulation for such condition or situation. Any person, resident, or officer, department, or appointed body of the City of Athens aggrieved by a decision of the Board may petition the Athens County Court of Common Pleas concerning the illegality of the decision. Such petition must be filed within 30 days after the mailing of the decision of the board to the applicant.
All right, so our case on the agenda tonight, just one case. We'll say to the second case we're not hearing tonight on the screen behind me. So just one case, number 24-19V at 141 Mill Street. The appellant is requesting a variance from ACC 23.08.01D to allow 3 on-site parking spaces where 56 spaces are required, and ACC 23.10.01 Table A to allow a 5-foot 9-inch front setback where 10 feet is required. So, Director Riggs, could you give us your brief of the case?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is actually 2 parts. The first part is the on-site parking. They have 3 handicap parking spaces on site. There's also 3 handicap spaces in the right-of-way in front of the property, but you can't count those. Then they're just adjacent to this property is another parcel that's owned by the same applicant, and they have 156 spaces there, so they have more spaces than is required, but it's off-site parking instead of on-site parking. The second part is the setback. This is an expansion of the property, of the structure on the property, and since they can't move backwards any farther, they're on the property line, they're going to move forward, and the plan is to move into the front setback, which is now 10 feet. It used to be 25 feet, now 10 feet. But they're moving into that 5.5, a little more than 5.5 feet. However, the property to the west of this property and the property just to the east of this property are also encroaching into that 10-foot setback under existing conditions. And so I believe the applicant is trying to match the setback or the front of the other 2 buildings.
Any questions for Mr. Riggs?
Is this parcel also Part 3, or how's it zoned?
So,
It's R3 zone, yeah. That whole, I think that whole area is, yeah.
Yeah. And how do this is a religious building? Like, how do they interact with residential zones? 'Cause I know
Yeah, so church is first allowed in an R1 zone, I think with some setback requirements, but any zone underneath that, and this is one of those, because we do stacked zoning, zones underneath that, it's principally allowed.
And there aren't any particular additional requirements that would, like a residential structure would have the same requirements.
Not for this property, yes.
how about lot coverage? I'm curious about that. It's pretty good, will be a pretty good coverage, but you know what percent that was offhand? It didn't seem to pass the threshold, but any idea what it was?
I don't know the answer to that.
I
Sorry.
think it's on this little chart
Oh, is it in there?
here.
Okay.
If I can do this without the mouse.
48%, we're 60%.
Okay, 48. All right.
48 or 60. Wow.
And impervious lot coverage is 67%, 90% is allowed, so, okay.
Yeah.
I guess the one detail is there's some stipulation in the code about having off-site parking within a certain distance is allowable, and that could be leased or owned, depending
Yes,
on the
yes.
situation. That doesn't automatically kick in, it seems, because we have to still make a decision, but we take that into consideration. Is
Yes.
that the right approach here?
Yeah, so the requirement is to have on-site parking. On-site parking is not available here, so there, as a variance, we can allow off-site parking. I think in this case, it's up to 100 or 1,500 feet away from the property. But again, that would need to be approved by the board.
In this case, it's, the plots look like they connect almost, or at touch
They do.
corners at least,
They
right?
do, yeah.
Okay, that's very close. Any other questions for Mr. Riggs? All right, at this time, I'd like to ask the appellant to, or their representative, to please approach the podium and provide, first of all, identify yourself and then provide any pertinent information or testimony to us to give reason why the request should be viewed favorably by the board. Yeah, name and address would be helpful, please.
My name is Trent DeBarun. I'm with VSWC Architects in Athens, Ohio. Our firm address is 603 West Union Street here in Athens, across from White's Mill. Do you need my home address as well?
No, that's fine, I believe.
Okay. So yes, in working with Father Mark at Christ the King Church, we were looking at it, and because the adjacent properties there, as Mr. Riggs mentioned, we were hoping that you guys would find it favorably that the church would have the same luxury as the adjacent properties and have the similar setback. And so we did go out and field verify from the face of the curb to those properties that we have dimensioned on the site plan. And I'm glad you guys found the maximum lot and impervious setbacks. But excuse me. So yes, the intent was to increase that to increase the size of the nave, so we can they can have more members attend this church. As you guys well know, the other church that's part of you may or may not know, I shouldn't be that presumptuous. The other Catholic church is St. Paul's Church up at the corner of it gets up to College Street, and they are tight with parking, and so increasing this sanctuary size might increase. You have provide better parking and hopeful growth in the Catholic faith. Yes, and the parking is there. I think where the space has 131, and I think we're asking we need. I can't remember exactly how many we need, but it's far less than 31. So 131. So
56, it says here, is what you need. So you've got plenty in that additional.
Yeah, 56.
area.
Yes. Yes. So I didn't really have anything else besides that.
A question.
Sure.
Is
ask
it?
away.
I never remember when the time is. So with this, because of how close this is going to be on the sidewalk and to the street, is the entrance going to be from that front-facing piece along Mill Street, or is the entrance going to change to a different part of the building?
So the entrance is going to actually. So that is a great question. Because right now, as you attend church, you always enter from the back of the church. So the intent would be that the entrance would be along this side right here.
Okay.
And not.
Oh, where it says porch area.
Right, so they're on
okay.
that side, correct.
Okay. Yeah.
So that way, when you're coming from the parking lot, you actually see the entrance of the church instead of the back side of the church.
Yeah. Yeah. My concern was if it was along the street, having the flow of people coming out of the church, blocking that sidewalk and potentially going into the street, having people gathering and talking. And I know that that's kind of an issue sometimes with the uptown church. When people come out onto the street, they're sort of all on the corner there. So I like this better.
Does this also add I guess it's west-facing entrance to the building? Historically, I think that was a stained glass window. Am I reading the plans correctly?
So you are correct that there would be some doors there. They
Along
I think
Stewart.
They expect most. They do have students that attend the church as well, and I think those doors there would be for the students. Right now, the main entrance is on Mill Street.
Right.
So the thought would be that move that around to the side, and you're correct where the stained glass window is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there are the 3 handicap spaces in the roadway, and so those folks would have to come around to the side, but that's not. I looked at the sidewalk, and it's in good condition, so it should be fine.
Part of with the residential zones and these decreases in setbacks, part of what that allows is a kind of engagement with the streetscape. You know, front porch is closer to the road, which is consistent with the character of, a lot of Athens. And so I think in asking for this setback to kind of match those existing residential structures, how is this, that kind of front face against Mill Street going to interact with that streetscape? You know, what does that look like, since that's not an entrance?
So I can honestly say we've not designed that. We were certainly just looking, but I do tell clients that my intent is to give them a building that they will be proud of. So that's the best I can give you at this point in time. I can tell you more than likely it won't have a porch.
And I wouldn't expect a church to have a porch, but I think I'm just kind of asking because I think in line with, the intent of the code is that, with those kind of smaller setbacks, that there is some level of, which I think is, I don't actually know what those immediately adjacent structures look like, but I think a lot of our older structures in Athens that have those smaller setbacks, you typically have that, that porch. And I think if you're not going to have an entrance there, I think there's a big difference between a big blank wall and a, kind of an institutional building versus, more of that residential scale with that shorter setback. And so that's kind of why I wonder how consistent that shorter setback is going to be with those, residential structures, and how the scale is going to kind of align with that existing, streetscape.
We will take that in consideration, as that's, if variance is great, no matter what the outcome is, we will certainly take that into consideration. I do think it's important to, but seriously, I do think it's very important to have a residential scale. I mean, human scale with right beside a building. Sometimes you go downtown to some of these big cities and you feel like a bug on the wall or something.
Yeah.
So I think it is very important that there is that human scale. So
Sure.
I do take pride in bringing that into the design when I do designs.
Sure.
So, one, kind of tying on to that question, with the maximum allowable height is 55 feet, the plans say 55 feet. Is that for the new section, or is that the existing building that is already, I don't think it's 55 feet tall, but
It is not.
yeah.
No.
So this is a taller addition, or is it?
It will be a taller addition. That's correct. Yes, I don't know if you've been in that existing church, but it's very, a couple of people from my office that just traveled to Europe, and they really, you really are uplifted in those higher ceilings, and so the intent is to make it
To put more of a sanctuary that has a high vaulted ceiling.
to make it more uplifting, spiritual, all of that. Yes, sir.
And then it looks like it only pushes into the unallowed setback by 4 feet and 3 inches.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Can you talk about, why you need that 4 feet and 3 inches, I guess?
It was
If you know what I mean?
Yes,
Right.
sir. It was to maximize the amount of seating capacity within the nave area. So it would provide a seating of 445 of occupants.
And if you were required to stick with the 10-foot setback, does that, you lose a row of seating? How much seating is?
On this floor plan here, I mean, the sanctuary and the sacristies would be smaller.
Okay.
We did have those conversations, and one of the problems that Father Mark does have with his existing facility is the sanctuary space isn't large enough to perform the service that he wishes to perform, and then the sacristies would be where they have vestments and then some storage of different items they needed for the altar in the sanctuary space.
Mm-hmm.
But I think just maybe to put a point on Shay's question, like, what is the depth of a row of seating in this, and how, like, if you lost that 4-3, like, how much would that reduce the seating capacity of the space?
So backup pew to backup pew is typically 3 feet in a church. So you would lose, well, in essence, you'd probably lose 2 rows if you had the 4 feet, because you couldn't do a partial. So I believe each one, I'm doing this by memory now, but off the record, I believe each one is about 12 seats per, they're 12 feet each pew is 12 feet long, and you divide it by 18 inches. So whatever that, let's see, 3, 6, 9, 12. Is that? I believe that's 6 seats per pew. Is that correct? So if you did 6, 12, 18, 12, so potentially you could use that, what, 48? You know, we would, if that's the case, what I would probably recommend would that we probably lose a row of pews and then see if he could, you know, if the sacristy in the sanctuary could become a little less in depth. Would be the fallback plan.
Would this require changing the address of the building since the front entrance is not going to be on Mill Street anymore? It's going to be more like on Playground.
Typically, we don't do that. You know, the address stays unless there's some very specific reason why they would need to change. Even though they're now going to be coming in from the side rather than the front, that address typically that stays the way it is.
Okay.
Okay, anyone else with questions for the appellant's representative? You guys have covered my questions, so made it easier for me. All right, so feel free to take a seat, and there's no one else here present, so I'll go through the formalities for a moment.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So, is there anyone wishing to speak in favor of the request? No. Anyone wishing to speak in general comment of the request? No. Anyone wishing to speak in opposition? I guess I should ask, was there any supporting emails or letters or anything? Okay. So there are no comments from anyone else on the project. So the appellant doesn't need to offer any rebuttal. So I'm closing the floor. Going through the process, make sure I do this all right. Yeah. And we'll now deliberate. So any comments before we start going through the discussion, before we start going through the questions?
I think, you know, I don't see a super strong reason to. A 55-foot structure is pretty, like, it's a pretty big and flat facade,
Yeah.
fairly close to the street and sidewalk. And I assume that it will be, you know, fairly, you know, like, it'll look nice, but it's still very different from the two structures on either side. One is, you know, maybe definitely not what I would call beautiful, but, you know, like it's a residential building with a porch.
Yeah.
Another one is you know, similar structure, and this is, you know, pretty different from that. You know,
Yeah. And it's essentially becoming the back side of the building on
on the
the
front
front where the sidewalk is.
and encroaching into that, like that setback.
Yeah, the back of the building is going to be essentially 5 feet from the sidewalk.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that it heavily impacts the viability or not of the case. I, having grown up very, very much right across the street from this building, I spent a bunch of time like playing in the green space, and like there's a loss of green space that's happening that I don't think is, you know, necessarily unreasonable, but it is like very much a, you know, loss of that space in a neighborhood that doesn't have a lot of kids anymore, to be honest. You know, I think the other comment it would just be that the new entrance onto Stewart Street, that I think, so they've done several different kind of expansions and rebuilds of this building over the years, and I think that used to be the sanctuary, like that stained glass, and so it's, you know, it's also a little bit, I would say, disappointing to take like the one feature that's like the oldest feature of the building and turn it into a doorway. But, you know, that's, yeah, I could be very wrong about that also.
So 55 feet in height. So, Mr. Riggs, what is the current height limitation? Is it 55 feet exactly?
It is 55.
It is 55, so this is maximum allowed. And that changed just recently, didn't it?
Yes,
With
it
the
did.
zoning change.
Used to be
It went from
3.5 feet.
45?
Yeah, 45 feet, yeah.
It went from 45 to 55 just in the last year. So, although the intent with the planning commission proposing that change was that it would allow for apartment buildings to be bigger along the street.
Yeah, and I don't think that that's like a problem in and of itself. I think it's like it's within the stated intent of the code, and the code just changed. So it's like I don't think that's in any way problematic. Other than the fact that it is also even closer to the sidewalk.
With a residential, with that increase in density, a residential structure, you would expect to have an engagement with the street level. You would have entrances, you would have architectural features on that street face, which I think is what we also see in our existing housing, what you would also see like along that street face now. I don't think there's necessarily any. It's this addition will transform that corner, and not necessarily for the worst, I don't think. But I think it's hard to say, especially knowing that is kind of it is kind of the back of the structure, which could be it's a church, kind of religious structures with like some architectural features like stained glass and things like that. I think there could be an opportunity for it to be a really kind of dramatic and still an improvement to that streetscape, but I think that's
It's going to be pretty flat.
That's
yeah.
right. It'll be a pretty big flat face, pretty close to that sidewalk, to that street.
Yeah.
I think to your point, the apartment building directly across the street is also fairly tall, and
It is.
but
about the
but it has
building?
that a little bit of that depth and that engagement with the street.
There's about to be another tall building very close by, the Patton Arts Education Center. It's going to be in this field here, very adjacent. Be quite tall. So I don't think that the height, the height is no issue in
No, yeah.
my mind. I don't, like, getting to sort of our criteria, I don't know that that is the minimum variance, I guess, having to encroach. I don't know that I see that is a need for this project to move forward, I guess is.
4 feet, just over. Seems like it's not. I think it looks like from the setbacks that they could go wider and a little bit less deep and have the same, basic, like building volume. So it doesn't seem like they don't have anywhere else to go.
I think 4 feet looks like it's maybe 600 square feet. And in addition, looks like it's, I don't know, like 75 by 60. I don't know I'm sure it says here somewhere. Addition 6,200, 6,300 square feet. So losing 600 of that, which, like you said, could potentially be made up in width, where they do have additional space.
I think also, sometimes we talk about it, absence of detriment, being represented by people coming in and, speaking against a case. I think in this case, I'm honestly slightly surprised that there's no support.
I think all the property owners, except for one, are entities. They're rental companies.
Yeah, but they're, theoretically, like
Commissioners.
200 plus people that are going to be in the space all the time. Like that,
Talk about it.
like honestly, I thought that there would be a lot more people, and
You're supporting and
here supporting,
this,
this project. and maybe it's just they were better than some people that, like asking for the variance early, which I think is like laudable. So I don't want to guess too much dispersion on that because we want that as a board, right?
And they came here knowing that there were just four of us too, so.
Yeah.
And they have to get 3 votes to pass. So my take on this front setback is, like you said, Ben, there's probably porches, I can't remember specifically, but on the adjacent properties. But they are about the same setback. That's not including steps, which that also changed in the code recently. Front steps, if they're not covered, are not included. So, while you can argue the minimum variance, the way the code reads now is they're allowed to do the average of the adjoining properties as the setback. Although, Mr. Riggs, I guess, clarification on one detail is they wouldn't be by right able to use that average because it is inside the front setback. It would be, what's the distinction as far as why we have to approve this if it's sort of the average of the other two adjoining properties?
I think it exceeds the average. Actually, what it's it's not the average. It's the lesser of the two. So
And
if you have an encroachment on the left and an encroachment on the right, it's the lesser encroachment that you can match without having to get a variance for.
and that is like a foot difference, I think, on the right.
So so by right, they could actually be within like a 3-foot encroachment or something like
Almost
that.
4 feet, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So it's not asking for much more than what they would have been allowed.
What, 3 inches?
A footish, maybe.
Something like that.
4 inches? No, 6 inches.
Is it just the immediately adjacent properties?
I believe so.
It has to be adjacent properties, right? So if there's a vacant lot on one side, you can't count that.
Okay.
What about the lot across the street? Is that,
In other words,
that's not adjacent, right?
No, you can't do it across the
So
street.
it's the one on the right that really counts here, and
Right, so it's 6 inches different.
not much different than that even, so.
So the average is the 3 inches, right? We're talking about.
Well, so in this case, we're just saying technically the building on the left is across the street.
Oh,
Stewart Street.
okay.
It doesn't technically count.
Okay.
It's not directly adjacent.
Okay.
So they're not asking for very much on that front setback, honestly.
Well, I think that's, just to be very clear, Director Riggs, they could propose this exact same thing with a 24-foot setback like the adjacent property.
2 foot 4 inch,
No, well, sorry, they're on their measurements, it's, sorry,
6 inches.
I think it's from the curb. so-
24
Yeah.
feet from the curb is the adjacent property to the
yes,
right,
yeah.
to the left as you look at it. So they could,
They could, yeah.
like, that would not require a variance at all. So they're
That's
really
correct.
only asking for 6 inches.
6 inches.
Correct.
Oh, well, okay, that's, yeah, okay, great, thank you for clarifying that, that's very useful.
All right, so let's start through the questions. Are there exceptional circumstances?
I mean, I think we've kind of come to the answer of no, or not.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything exceptional. Well, parking, I
Yeah, the
guess.
parking.
For parking, there is. We
Yeah.
haven't talked a lot about the parking, right? But
Yeah.
we've been talking more about the setback.
Are we voting and discussing these together or independently?
Yes, so the questions, I'll walk through the questions, and we talk about our opinions about that. So you don't have to say anything, but often one person will say something and the others will agree or disagree, but you can make your comments on each question. And that then helps us decide. If we say no on something, it doesn't mean we say no to the variance necessarily.
Yeah.
We have to weigh the situation still. But
But so there's the 2 different requests. Like,
Oh,
do we
two
vote on
different
those
requests. Oh, I see
together
what you're
or
saying. Sorry.
independently?
We're voting together on these, I think, as one package, right?
Yes, it's typically what you do.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I misunderstood.
Oh, that's okay.
I know we haven't been on one of these meetings
know.
together before, so still figuring this out. So exceptional circumstances. For the setback, it seems like there's not exceptional circumstances, but for the parking, there's clearly, they've got 3 handicap spaces, which I'm surprised they're able to maintain that on the property, actually. So there really isn't much room to do that kind of, and it's allowable
That's
for
what
them to
they're doing
use a nearby
currently.
property.
What they're doing currently, they use those current off-site spaces.
And it is already what they're doing. So exceptional circumstances, I think, yes, in this case for the parking part.
Yeah, you could not cite 56 spots on this property, probably even without building anything, right?
So is there a practical difficulty and undue hardship? Literal enforcement of these regulations will result in practical difficulty or undue hardship.
I mean,
The 6 inches, I think, is negligible.
Yeah, I didn't know
I
for
think for the
this.
parking requirements.
Yeah, for parking, yes. For setback, no.
yeah, I would agree with that.
Preservation of equal property rights. So that's what we've been discussing with the setbacks. And it is about what is allowed, very close, 6 inches up from what is allowed by right with the new setbacks that were passed this year by City Council. As far as parking goes, I don't know the circumstances on the apartment buildings in the area, but probably some of those don't have all their parking requirements met on their property, would be my guess. That's speculative.
Yeah, well, we've definitely. I have the property that I owned on Mill Street. I don't any longer have off-site parking across the street, so and I have a variance for it. So
And so I think we're not really granting any special rights here. Minimum variance?
I think if 6 inches is definitely pretty minimal.
Absence of detriment. So we haven't had anybody come forward. We did discuss a little bit that the height may be a little bit of a question here as how it interacts with the neighborhood, but
I mean, I can't say. I mean, it's within the code, and the code was just updated in this regard. So I have a really hard time suggesting that the recently updated code is detrimental to people.
Yeah.
So I feel pretty strongly that it's not. The height is not it's within the.
I mean, that was part of the intent of the code updates to allow for some density in our neighborhoods and kind of allow for that what historically has been that kind of like, those more like dense streetscapes where we have, where we don't have those, kind of deep setbacks. So, I mean, yeah.
and not of a general nature. I don't see this as being a general nature, although parking requirements are something that are sort of a general problem in the city.
Yeah.
And meeting them is difficult in some cases, but I don't see this as being of a general nature. So would someone from the board like to propose a motion?
I can propose one. Let me get back to the top where the info is.
You could hear it off the screen.
Yeah. I'd like to propose the granting of a variance for case number 24-19V at 141 Mill Street, where the appellant is requesting a variance from ACC 23.08.
23.01D to allow 3 on-site parking spaces where 56 parking spaces are required, and ACC 23.10.01 Table A to allow a 5-foot 9-inch front setback where 10 feet is required.
Okay, do we have a second for the motion?
I'll second that.
All right, any discussion before we vote? All right, all in favor, please raise your right hand. Okay, so you have your variance 4-0. Thank you very much for coming to the board.
Thank you. Appreciate the thoughtful discussion, and I'll take your comments into consideration.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Okay, so other business, disposition of minutes from November 12th. So 3 of us were here, right? Yes.
Yeah.
So we do have a quorum to vote on the minutes. I didn't see any issues when I reviewed them.
No, I didn't either.
Any issues from you guys?
Alicia, do you want a motion?
So
I just motion to approve the minutes from November 12th, 2024.
Second?
I don't think I'm supposed to do those things, so.
Yeah, you're not.
So it was up to you guys. So all in favor of approving the minutes, raise your right hand.
Aye.
Thank you. So minutes are approved, and that concludes our business for this evening.
Thank you.